911, what's your emergency? There's a man drinking beer on his own porch. Silence. Even the dispatcher didn't know how to respond. That's right. Karen, the self-appointed ruler of our HOA, actually called the cops because I had the audacity to enjoy a cold one in front of my own house. But that was just the beginning. What started as a petty complaint spiraled into the most ridiculous neighborhood war ever. Midnight grass inspections, fake HOA rules, and a final showdown that left the entire community cheering for her downfall. Want to see how a simple beer led to Karen's ultimate humiliation? Buckle up. This is one story you don't want to miss. Hello beautiful peoples, before we dive in, let me know, where are you watching this from? Tell us in the comments and help us to complete 1,000 subscriber. A peaceful neighborhood always seems like an ideal place to live, until an HOA Karen decides to enforce her own set of rules. The sun shines down on a row of identical houses, each with carefully maintained lawns and matching mailboxes, all under the watchful eye of the ever-diligent Homeowners Association. Among the residents is a laid-back homeowner who just wants to enjoy life without unnecessary drama. Unfortunately, in this carefully curated suburban utopia, drama has a name. Karen. Karen isn't just any neighbor, she is the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, armed with a clipboard, an iron will, and an uncanny ability to find problems where none exist. Whether it's the color of a mailbox, the position of a trash can, or the presence of a single stray leaf on a driveway, she is on a mission to enforce the rules, even if she has to make them up. The first sign of trouble comes when Karen approaches, her lips pursed in disapproval, her posture radiating authority. She isn't here for small talk. No, she is here to protect the integrity of the neighborhood. Today's offense? Something so trivial, so minuscule, that any reasonable person would dismiss it immediately. But Karen is not a reasonable person. You can't have that beer on your porch, she declares, as if revealing some hidden clause buried deep within the HOA bylaws. A confused glance. A slow sip. Says who? Says the HOA, she insists, despite the fact that no such rule exists. Karen stands firm, her gaze unwavering, convinced that she alone understands the moral fiber of the community. This is only the beginning. The first of many encounters. The start of an escalating battle where logic, reason, and basic human enjoyment are pitted against the sheer force of one woman's entitlement. Karen's power trip didn't start overnight. It built up gradually, like a storm gathering strength over the open sea. At first, her complaints were nothing more than mild irritations. A pointed glance here, a passive-aggressive comment there. But as time went on, it became clear that she wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was on a mission. The first real sign of trouble came in the form of a notice taped to the front door. A bright yellow piece of paper printed with bold, ominous letters. HOA violation notice. The supposed offense? A single leaf had found its way onto the driveway. At first it seemed like a joke. A prank played by a bored neighbor. But no, Karen stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching like a hawk. She had done this. Karen, it's a leaf, came the calm but baffled response. It's debris, she snapped, as if the leaf was a biological hazard. And the HOA has strict rules about maintaining curb appeal. A light breeze picked up, rustling through the trees. More leaves drifted down, landing gently across several driveways. Karen's expression darkened. This was only the beginning. Over the next few days, the violation notices continued. A tiny garden gnome was deemed an unapproved decorative item. The mailbox, identical to every other mailbox on the street, was suddenly not in compliance. Even the sound of laughter from the backyard one evening prompted a visit from Karen, who stood at the fence, scowling as if human joy itself was a violation. It became clear that Karen wasn't just following the HOA rules. She was inventing them. One afternoon, she stood in front of the house, clipboard in hand, measuring the grass with a ruler. "It's over 3 inches, she declared. "That's what grass does. It grows," came the exasperated response. "The HOA requires it to be trimmed to exactly 2 inches, she insisted, despite no such rule existing in the actual handbook. Karen had no official power within the HOA, but that didn't stop her from acting as if she did. She would wander the neighborhood like a self-appointed enforcer, stopping in front of homes, inspecting every detail, writing down imaginary infractions in her ever-present notebook. And then came the incident. A warm Saturday afternoon. The perfect day to sit outside, relax, and enjoy a cold beer on the front porch. Birds chirped, kids rode their bikes up and down the street, and all was right with the world. Until Karen arrived. She stormed across the sidewalk with the righteous fury of someone who had just discovered a major crime in progress. Hands on her hips, eyes locked onto the offending beverage, she took a deep breath before launching into full attack mode. "You can't have that here," she snapped. Confused, the response was simple. "Have what?" "The beer. Alcohol is not allowed outside. It's a violation of community standards." A slow sip. A long pause. "Karen, this is my porch." Karen's nostrils flared. "It's still visible from the street. That makes it public. And the HOA handbook says." "Karen, have you actually read the HOA handbook?" For a split second her confidence wavered. But Karen wasn't one to back down. "I don't need to read it. I helped write the new rules." There was the confession. Karen had taken it upon herself to dictate policies that didn't exist. A bemused chuckle. "Well, unless the actual handbook says I can't have a beer on my own property, I think I'll keep enjoying it." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You're breaking the rules," she shrieked loud enough for the entire street to hear. "I will report this to the HO." A casual shrug. "Go ahead." But that wasn't enough for Karen. No, she needed immediate action. She needed justice. And so she did what any completely unhinged, overzealous HO tyrant would do. She pulled out her phone. He dialed 911. The call that followed was a thing of legend. "Yes, I'd like to report an illegal activity," she told the dispatcher, her voice dripping with self-righteous indignation. "There is a man drinking alcohol in public." A long pause. Then presumably the dispatcher asked for more details. "Well," she hesitated, "he's on his porch, but it's still visible from the street. And it's against our HO rules." Another pause. Karen's frustration grew. "Yes, I need an officer to come immediately. This is a clear violation of our community standards." The neighbors who had started gathering whispered amongst themselves. Some were horrified. Others were trying not to laugh. The protagonist sat back in the chair, taking another slow sip of the beer, watching the spectacle unfold. This was peak Karen behavior. Minutes later, a patrol car rolled into the neighborhood. 2 officers stepped out, looking mildly amused but mostly confused. Karen ran to them like a woman who had just witnessed a felony in progress. "There he is," she shouted, pointing dramatically. "Freaking. Right there." The officers exchanged a glance. One approached, clearly struggling to keep a straight face. "Sir," he said, "we got a call about public drinking." A nod toward the beer. "Yep." Another pause. "On your own property?" "Yep." A long sigh. The officer turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, that's not illegal." But the HOA rules." "We don't enforce HOA rules," the officer interrupted, already turning back toward his car. Karen stood there, sputtering, completely at a loss. The neighbors erupted into quiet laughter. The officers drove away. Karen, defeated, glared at the protagonist one last time before storming off. It should have ended there. But Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Karen's tantrum over a simple beer should have been the final straw. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. She went into full-blown attack mode, convinced that a personal vendetta was the only way to restore order to the neighborhood. The protagonist, however, wasn't about to let Karen steamroll over reality. There was no need for an all-out war, at least not yet. Instead, it was time for a different approach. A subtle, calculated retaliation. The first step was simple: refuse to engage directly. The next morning, Karen was back at it, clipboard in hand, marching down the street with the exaggerated self-importance of a security guard patrolling a high-crime area. She stopped in front of the house, arms crossed, expecting confrontation. Nothing. Instead of reacting, the protagonist simply waved, smiled, and took a sip of his morning coffee on the same porch where the infamous beer crime had taken place. Karen narrowed her eyes, waiting for a reaction. When none came, she huffed and stormed off. It drove her insane. She wanted a fight. She wanted yelling, arguing, maybe even a petition against her tyranny. But what she got instead was calm indifference. And that, more than anything, was what set her off the most. Then came the next phase of retaliation, playing by the rules, and exposing Karen's hypocrisy. A deep dive into the actual HOA handbook revealed an interesting discovery. Karen, despite her obsession with regulations, had been breaking multiple rules herself. Her house had unapproved holiday decorations, a set of gaudy plastic flamingos that had somehow remained in her yard all year long. Her trash bins were stored in the wrong location, visible from the street. Her hedges were 2 inches taller than the HOA guidelines allowed. Armed with this knowledge, the protagonist made a simple, perfectly legal move. He reported her. Not directly, of course. That would be too obvious. Instead, an anonymous complaint was submitted to the HOA board, detailing these violations. If Karen wanted to live by the rules, she would have to follow them too. A week later, Karen received her first official violation notice. The neighborhood buzzed with quiet amusement. No one had ever seen Karen on the receiving end of an HOA reprimand before. She was always the one handing them out, not the one getting them. The moment she found the notice taped to her door, the meltdown was instantaneous. She stormed into the HOA office demanding answers. She called an emergency HOA meeting to protest what she called an unfair attack. She even attempted to argue that her decorations were grandfathered in, despite there being no such clause in the handbook. But the best part? The petty escalation. Karen, in an effort to reassert dominance, began writing even more complaints against the protagonist. The porch light was too bright. The welcome mat was too large. The garden hose was improperly coiled. Every morning a new notice appeared. But instead of frustration, this only fueled the next level of retaliation. With every complaint Karen filed, the protagonist found another one to send right back her way. All completely justified, all straight from the handbook. If Karen wanted a rule enforcement war, she was about to get one. And then the final touch. A public challenge. During the next HOA meeting, when Karen predictably launched into another tirade about violations ruining the community, the protagonist raised a hand. Karen, can you show me where in the HOA handbook it says that having a beer on my porch is against the rules? Silence. Karen's mouth opened then closed. She scrambled, flipping through pages, searching desperately for something, anything, that backed up her claim. Nothing. Because it had never been a rule. And now the entire neighborhood knew it. The meeting ended with quiet snickers and exchanged glances among the other homeowners. The seed had been planted. Karen's reign wasn't just being challenged, it was crumbling. She stormed out, muttering under her breath. But this was only the beginning. Because soon the entire neighborhood would start fighting back. The neighborhood had always been a quiet place. Well-manicured lawns, perfectly spaced driveways, the occasional garage sale. But thanks to Karen, it had turned into something else entirely. Whispers spread. People who had once tolerated Karen's antics with polite smiles now started openly questioning her authority. The moment she received her own HOA violation, the entire dynamic shifted. Some neighbors found it hilarious. Tom from next door, a longtime victim of Karen's pettiness, nearly choked on his coffee when he heard the news. Wait, she got a violation? You mean the queen of compliance herself? He said between laughs. That's the best thing I've heard all year. He wasn't alone. Quiet chuckles and knowing glances passed between homeowners whenever Karen stomped down the street, still fuming over her newfound status as an offender. Others saw an opportunity. Diane, who lived a few houses down, had been battling Karen for years over trivial things. Christmas lights, mailbox height, even the placement of her recycling bin. This is our chance, she whispered conspiratorially one evening. If she can be taken down once, she can be taken down again. Then there were Karen's loyalists. Not everyone was ready to let the self-appointed HOA enforcer lose her grip. A small but vocal group of neighbors, mostly retirees with too much time on their hands, stood by her side. She's just trying to keep the community beautiful, one of them argued at an HOA meeting. She's keeping it miserable, Tom muttered under his breath. Lines were being drawn. And then things got dramatic. One morning a new HOA complaint was filed, against Karen. The offense? Excessive yard decorations. It was a clear message. Someone was fighting back. Karen responded immediately. She called an emergency HOA meeting. She marched into the community center, papers in hand, her voice trembling with righteous anger. I have dedicated years to keeping this neighborhood in order, she began, scanning the crowd. And this This attack on me is nothing more than an act of pettiness and disrespect. The neighborhood sat in silence. Then someone coughed. Then a chuckle. And finally Tom couldn't hold it in anymore. He laughed, loud, full-bodied, unrestrained. Karen's face turned red. This isn't funny. Oh, it's hilarious, he countered, wiping a tear from his eye. Karen, do you hear yourself? For the first time, Karen seemed to realize she was losing control. The usual fear and obedience weren't there anymore. People weren't nodding along. They were rolling their eyes, checking their phones, exchanging amused glances. The power she once wielded so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. She stormed out before the meeting was even over. But the damage had already been done. By the end of the week, the neighborhood had become a full-blown rebellion. More anonymous complaints were filed. Against Karen. Her lawn flamingos? Unapproved decor. Her front porch plants? Too many potted items in a shared space. Her security cameras? Installed without proper HOA permissions. One by one the violations stacked up. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't the one dictating the rules. She was the one drowning in them. And the best part? The entire community was in on it. Karen wasn't used to losing. She had spent years wielding her self-appointed authority over the neighborhood, ensuring that every mailbox, every flower bed, every parked car met her impossibly high standards. But now the tables had turned. The first signs of her unraveling were subtle. She was seen pacing in her driveway, furiously flipping through the HOA handbook, highlighting sections, making frantic notes. Then came the desperate escalation. Karen turned her paranoia into action. She began waking up at sunrise, patrolling the neighborhood as if she were a one-woman code enforcement unit. Armed with a tape measure, she checked the height of people's grass. She took pictures of driveways, counting the number of vehicles parked. She even started peering over fences, probably to see if anyone had illegal patio furniture. And then Karen did the unthinkable. She trespassed. One night she was caught measuring a neighbor's lawn, at 11 p.m. Tom, the same neighbor who had laughed at her meltdown, nearly choked on his coffee the next morning when he reviewed his security footage. "Is that Karen?" he asked, rewinding the video. There she was, hunched over in the moonlight, ruler in hand, inspecting the height of his grass like a detective at a crime scene. By the time the footage made its way into the community group chat, Karen had officially crossed the line from annoying to completely unhinged. The HOA meeting that sealed her fate. At the next HOA meeting, Karen stormed in, carrying a binder labeled Neighborhood Offenders. She slammed it onto the table and began flipping through pages, naming and shaming homeowners for their supposed violations. "Tom's grass is half an inch too tall," she ranted. "Diane's front door is an unapproved shade of beige. Steve's garden gnome, a clear violation of community decorum." The room was silent. Then the HOA president, an older gentleman who had tolerated Karen's antics for years, finally had enough. "Karen," he said, rubbing his temples, "you're not on the HOA board." Silence. Karen's face turned red. I don't have to be. I'm ensuring compliance." The HOA president sighed. "Karen, we've received multiple complaints about you. About your harassment of residents. About your trespassing." "I was measuring grass," she shrieked. A voice from the back. "At midnight, Karen?" The room erupted in laughter. Karen's power was slipping, and she knew it. Then came the final blow. The HOA president reached into his folder and pulled out a notice. "We're issuing you a formal warning for multiple violations," he said. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't do that." "Oh, we can. And we have. You've been in violation of at least 4 HOA rules for years." The room buzzed. Karen herself had been breaking the rules. "Your flamingos," the HOA president continued. "Not approved decor." Karen gasped. "Your trash bins. Visible from the street." Her face paled. "Your holiday lights. Up past the allowed time." Karen was speechless. Then the final, most humiliating punishment of all. "We're also issuing you a fine," the HOA president finished. The room erupted. People whispered, nudged each other, exchanged triumphant smirks. Karen, the neighborhood tyrant, had finally been brought down by her own rules. She turned on her heel and stormed out, knocking over a stack of pamphlets on her way. The neighborhood cheered. Karen had spent years terrorizing the neighborhood with her clipboard, her fake HOA rules, and her absolute refusal to mind her own business. But after her spectacular downfall at the HOA meeting, things started changing fast. At first she tried to fight back. She went door to door ranting about unfair persecution, demanding that people stand up against the injustice of her own violations. Nobody listened. Tom pretended not to hear her knocking. Diane accidentally turned on her sprinklers when she saw Karen approaching. The rest of the neighborhood simply ignored her. Karen for the first time was powerless. And then karma struck. First the fines. The same HOA that she had weaponized against everyone else was now coming after her. A $100 fine for unapproved lawn decorations. A $50 penalty for improperly stored trash bins. A warning letter for leaving up holiday lights past the HOA-approved time frame. Karen fought every single one. She wrote emails, filed complaints, even tried to appeal the violations to the HOA board. But the best part? She had no allies left. Not even her loyalist group of rule followers wanted to associate with her anymore. He was too much even for them. Then the ultimate humiliation. A few weeks later, the HOA voted on new board members. 4 years, Karen had operated without an official position. But after her defeat, she decided to run for the board, hoping to regain her authority. She lost. Badly. She didn't just lose, she came in dead last. The final blow? The new HOA president, Tom. Yes, the same Tom whose grass she measured at midnight. The same Tom who had openly laughed at her ridiculous rules. His first act as HOA president? Reversing most of the petty rules Karen had enforced. Garden gnomes? Allowed. Porch beers? Completely fine. Karen's flamingos? Still banned. It was poetic justice. And Karen? She wasn't seen much after that. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood. No more clipboard, no more late-night inspections, no more surprise violation notices. And a few months later, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. Karen was moving. The neighborhood celebrated. That weekend, everyone put up extra decorations, garden gnomes, pink flamingos, LED lights, anything that would have driven Karen crazy. The best part? A neighborhood-wide front porch beer toast. As Karen packed up her last box, she saw them. A dozen neighbors sitting on their porches sipping beers, waving goodbye. She scowled. She huffed. And finally she was gone. With Karen finally gone, the neighborhood felt lighter. There was no more clipboard patrol. No more random violation notices taped to doors. No more Karen-related emergencies that required HOA meetings. People started relaxing in ways they hadn't in years. Lawn flamingos made a glorious comeback. Garden gnomes multiplied overnight. Porch beers? Practically a requirement. Tom, now officially the HOA president, made good on his promise to undo Karen's ridiculous rules. Mailboxes could finally be any shade of beige people wanted. Trash bins could be left out an extra hour without fear of a complaint. No one, under any circumstances, was allowed to measure grass at midnight. It was a new era. Karen's house didn't stay on the market for long. A nice, quiet couple moved in, the kind of people who minded their own business and didn't believe in calling the police over a can of beer. And as the weeks passed, people stopped talking about Karen as much. The neighborhood went back to being a peaceful place. But every now and then someone would bring her up, usually with a laugh. Remember when Karen called 911 over a beer? Or the time she measured my lawn at midnight? And of course the ultimate memory, the day she received her own HOA violations. The legend of Karen's downfall became neighborhood folklore, a story passed down to new homeowners as a cautionary tale about the dangers of taking HOA power too seriously. And the protagonist? Well, porch beers never tasted better.